The dream machine. Diacom, HL7, I18 in the stack. We're building the future, never looking back.
Hey everybody, Jason here, and welcome back to Imaging Informatics Unplugged. And a quick confession before we begin. This is actually the third time that my guest and I tried to record this episode. Between scheduling hiccups and the occasional tech disaster, it really felt like the imaging informatics gods were trying to stop us. But third time's a charm, and trust me, this one was definitely worth the wait. Today, I'm joined by Ameena Elahi. Ameena serves as the Director of Informatics and Operations at RAD-AID and is also the Associate Director of AI Initiatives at Penn Medicine. With a background that bridges medical imaging, informatics, and global health, Ameena is leading the charge in implementing responsible, impactful AI solutions that enhance clinical workflows and promote health equity. In our conversation today, we dive into the realities of deploying PACS and AI in low-resource settings, the creative problem-solving it demands, and how building human connections is just as critical as building technical infrastructure. Ameena also shares some incredible stories about the work that she's done in Nigeria and Ghana, and we talk about RAD-AID's thoughtful approach to AI adoption through their Teach, Try, Use framework. Now, if you're passionate about imaging, AI, or global health, or you just want to hear about what real-world informatics looks like beyond first-world luxuries, you're in the right spot. And hey, if you like conversations like this, I would encourage you, hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. With all that said, let's get into the episode. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ameena. This is the third time's a charm. We've tried to do this a couple of times, and here we go for another chance at this. And thank you very much for being here today. Today we're going to have a conversation about the work that you are involved with at RAD-AID. And so RAD-AID is this amazing organization that I've been fortunate enough to volunteer and help out with from times. And you're the Director of Informatics at RAD-AID, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how some of the things that you've been able to be activities that you've done that have been instrumental in bringing imaging informatics to low resource settings. And if you could share a specific implementation of either like a PACS or AI implementation in one of the regions, we'd love to hear about that.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you so much. I do love RAD-AID. It's such a big part of my life, and they do so much for communities in low resource settings. As the operations director at RAD-AID, I get to see a lot. Most of my work is remote. However, I have had some travel a few times. I'll pick my first travel experience, which was installing a PACS at the University College Hospital in Ibadan, Nigeria. It was such an amazing experience. I went as a SIM Global Ambassador, which is how I was introduced to RAD-AID. And it was very stressful, right? We only had 2 weeks to install this PACS system. And while we did a lot of work prior, I had never been to that site. I'm meeting a lot of new people who really made it an integral part of the experience and the success, those on site and those that I travel with.
Nice. I remember when you were there. You sharing photos on social media. I think Dr. Awen was there with you. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And so tell us a bit about that. So you're in Nigeria, and were you putting a PACS in at the hospital?
Correct. It was their first PACS system. Previously, they did use Clear Canvas, but it was their first integrated PACS system with the modalities that we were able to connect with. And yeah, we had 2 weeks to do it. Dr. Farouk Dako led the charge, and he actually brought the physical server over with him, which was amazing, right?
What year are we talking?
This was 2019. 2019. I can't believe it's been that long.
So I'm just thinking, bringing a physical device, so it kind of shows that you're not relying on cloud as much, maybe as maybe the implementations are now, or would that be the same way that? I'd love to hear a little bit about the physical. Like, is that common, or is there? I know when I was in Nepal and I think in Ghana, There
Yeah.
was actually not Ghana, but Nepal. We had cloud implementation there. Is that kind of the pattern now, or is it kind of depends on the site?
It definitely depends on the site. It's kind of a mixed bag. So different countries have different governance and rules around whether or not they can use the cloud. Most times we go prefer a hybrid situation, which is what we did at UCH. One of the things you have to be wary of the cloud when it's amazing when you can use it is the infrastructure at the site and the connectivity. So having a hybrid solution is typically your best bet.
And I'm always like, there's this quote about art where there's no expression of art if you don't have restriction. Haiku poems have to follow a certain structure. And sometimes that brings out more creativity because we have to work within a certain parameter. So within low LMICs, sometimes they're working within a certain structure of restrictions, whether that's financial resources or human resources that they just don't have the ability to throw at the problem the same way. And sometimes that a lot of really creative solutions and workarounds get born out of that. Were you able to see anything like that yourself when you were on site?
You definitely have to get creative. I think when I was on site, what amazed me the most, honestly, was their day-to-day well-oiled machine. In high-income countries, if we lose something like power, many people in the healthcare setting are kind of freaking out, although we continue to do the best we can during a downtime situation. They lost power several times a day, and I was amazed on how efficient they were while they didn't have power until it came back up. One of the things we were able to donate a couple of years after the PACS donation was a UPS, specifically for the reading room, which was really nice.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. So, you're in Nigeria. That's your first implementation. What other places have you been able to, you've mentioned remote, but you have had the opportunity of going on site to locations. Other continents, other countries that you've been able to visit and meet with?
For RAD-AID specifically, I've only been to the continent of Africa. So I actually went back to Nigeria twice. They're my family now. I have a whole Nigerian mom. And I really feel like a lot of this really does start with the relationships, right? About 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I also had the privilege of going to Ghana, which was also amazing. I did not do an implementation there, but it was part of a, let's say, call it tour, to really continue the connections with the various sites that we partner with there in discussions for AI
Did you
implementation.
get to go to Korlebu?
I did go to Corderville, yes.
It is true what you say, though. You build these connections. I've been to the two experiences where I got to go to Korlebu and help out with the risk implementation in Nepal. And you really build this connection. I have Ben and Binod, both respectively from Ghana and from Nepal on WhatsApp. We chat quite often, and it's nice to be able to, I really consider them true friends. And beyond just, you're going there and implementing something, you're really establishing a human connection.
Yes. And we can't do the implementations without them, right? But yes, the human connection always helps to come first.
That's terrific. So I'd love to hear more about the remote side of things. So when you're working in a remote method of whether it's, I guess, is it an implementation or is it overseeing the operations post implementation? What does that look like when you're engaged remotely?
It's a little bit of everything. There are some very thorough project plans that the team works on. They're working on quite a few right now. Most of the time, I feel like it's the conversation that we're having post implementation that I've been the most involved in. However, there's also that pre-work that has to happen. There will be a semi-remote implementation coming up, but it doesn't mean that people aren't hands-on in some type of way. It just means that RAD-AID and our SIM Global Ambassador volunteer is not able to make it on site for various reasons. So we do a lot of education online, as you are aware, and just troubleshooting or really working with the site so we can help them, troubleshoot on their own. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you mentioned on the educational side of things, and there is this aspect where we take a lot of things for granted. Many people on working in the U.S. or Canada or Europe, they probably, depending on your age, you probably haven't interacted much with a film-based environment and gone from film to digital. And it's a very big paradigm shift when you're putting in a PACS or a RIS net new, and it's different than a replacement model. I'm curious what types of challenges you often meet with, and how how you and the team overcome these types of challenges.
There's a variety of things. One thing you have to be prepared for is that anything can happen any given time, right? And that's just, IT for you. It also happens in high income countries. I am definitely old enough to have dealt with actual film and then kind of weaning people off of film as I worked in the image processing department years ago. So it's some of those same efforts in LMICs. People are still going to want film. The biggest challenge is, as we're trying to get people off film, they are not bringing the images back, right? So they're taking them to whatever referring physician or other clinic, and they're not bringing them back. So we can't, or the site cannot use them for priors. That's a challenge that we've dealt with through the PACS system now that we can do image exchange at some of our sites. However, it's something that is still continuing to develop.
Yeah, that's interesting. So image exchange, and it would be a much more nuanced, because I guess the use of mobile devices is very prevalent in LMICs, but you need to make sure that, is the system compatible? Is it secure? And how are they going to be able to gain access if this is, patient-driven access as opposed to being able to carry the film away?
Exactly.
I'm curious as well, like, from the adoption perspective at the hospital. This is a kind of a human challenge no matter where you are, where you put a new device in, and it often, in the field that we're in, we interact with many people that look at this as purely IT, and they forget the human element of making sure that the people that we're implementing this to, they have to be nurtured and trained and adjusted their complete way of thinking. What approaches have you taken when it comes to a successful adoption?
So when it comes to successful adoption, starting from the point of buy-in, that's really when those human connections come into play, and keeping up with things such as, reoccurring calls and asking questions, but also asking the right questions. I know during my second visit at UCH, we were surprised to find out that when we got there, I want to say it was a router or something that needed to be replaced. And it was something that in the US would have been inexpensive to replace. They didn't think to tell us, and I did not think to ask. So we were gratefully able to replace it, while we were there. It's one of those things where communication is key. And you mentioned like things being mobile, but they don't always have access to the internet, right? WhatsApp is probably the biggest application next to PACS that we use when we're working with LMICs.
Interesting. And so we've talked a bit about your PACS implementation. When I was in Nepal, the PACS had been in for about 6 months prior, and there was an implementation underway around an AI-based tool that would help. I think it was for chest analysis and chest X-rays. How has AI, how is it being used in some of the LMICs, and how is it being integrated, and how is it being accepted by the users as well?
So I can answer that with the overall framework that RAD-AID uses. There is a teach, try, use 3-pronged approach. At first, it's all about education. So introduction to AI, but before that, right? Introduction to informatics, making sure everyone has a decent understanding about the process, how it's implemented, how we're testing. And that's not just for the radiologist, right? It's from the administration on up. And then there's the try, right? This is when we're looking and taking a heavy look into the site's infrastructure, making sure it's compatible, looking for that buy-in and use case. And then the use is the pilot, where we're doing a small pilot to see whether or not it will work, such as she mentioned the automated chest x-ray reads. And we typically go in that order: teach, try, use, but we don't necessarily stay in that order. You always have to come back to education, and you always have to tweak depending on what's happening. And you most definitely can't just plug and play, even from one LMIC site to another. Outside of chest, we've also looked at some breast AI as well as reporting. So it's been pretty exciting.
I'm curious. So some of these models, they may not be, the model is only as good as the data that it's been trained on. And I'm wondering how much of a consideration, and if that's ever been something that you've bumped up against, where the model is just not fitting in with the location. For example, Toronto is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. And if you took a patient identity model that worked in, pick a middle America somewhere, it's not going to work the same way just because the names are different and so on. So I'm curious if that's a challenge that you come up across before.
It's something that we discuss constantly, and I think everyone should, right, when they're implementing AI. And that really goes in part of the teach phase, but definitely the try phase, where we're looking at things prior to putting them into production to see what is and isn't working before we do a full-on deployment and then still having an isolated pilot. I know for UCH and Guyana, when we implemented the AI for chest reads, there was a blind reader study where we had radiologists use a rubric and identify, what will work best for that environment.
And so that blind study, was that RADs that work at the hospital that was going to be implemented at, or were they outside referring RADs that were volunteering or whatnot?
There were RADs that were volunteering with RAD-AID, who were also working with and collaborating with the RADs at those prospective sites. Now, this is something that should be happening at high-income countries. We do it at my facility right now as well, but it's always going to look different in an LMIC. To your point, a lot of vendors are training on data from high-income countries and regions that do not look like the sites that we're working with.
Very interesting. And so you mentioned a bit of the team that you were with, and I find that when I went to Nepal, I've been to Nepal twice. The second time we had a cohort of individuals, and it's really encouraging when you're with a team. There are all these different specialties. You might have an ultrasound tech and a radiologist, and us geeky PACS people here, and we're all coming together with this single kind of mindset of trying to volunteer and help out and see what we can put forth. So the tides rise all boats, I said, so to speak. I'm curious if you have thoughts about other things that are afoot for the next year ahead, and anything that you want to kind of talk about that, or you're excited about, that RAD-AID is about to venture into over the next year.
So I do want to touch on your point about teams. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my other partner for the UCH implementation, Jonathan Zimmer. I did not know any of them before we came there. A couple of them knew each other, and we're still friends to this day as well. We still keep up although we're all in the US, we still keep up our WhatsApp chat, and been to each other's big events, etc. Although most of us are in different states. There's quite a few exciting things that are happening with RAD-AI. Just over a year ago, we got a really big Google grant was going to allow us to help over 20 countries and different sites. And that comes with, it's about AI, right? But a lot of that also starts with the infrastructure. So one of the things that we've already had implemented that I love, and that we're going to continue to build on, outside of this smart reporting, is the breast AI, right? When it comes to LMICs and low resource settings, many of those sites are just now getting mammal units, and they may have one mammal unit. So while the X-ray technologists may have trained in school to learn how to do mammals, they don't have a lot of experience once they get those particular units. And there is AI that will help them look at positioning and give them real-time feedback.
That's incredible. And it's interesting. Like for those that are maybe watching right now, sometimes when we think of AI in imaging, what kind of catches the stage is the computer vision aspect.
Yes.
But as you've just touched on, procedure guidance, there's so many aspects in the workflow where AI can have this significant impact. And yeah, so that would be that's quite a compelling case there. One of the things that I find interesting with RAD-AID is that, there is this focus on LMICs, but when you look at the chapters and the areas that you're involved in, there's other areas I've seen, kind of rural United States and northern Canada and so on. Could you speak to some of those initiatives that RAD-AID is involved in?
Absolutely. Many people think of us as a global health organization, which we are. However, that doesn't mean that we don't work in high income countries. There are a lot of healthcare issues and disparities in low resource settings and rural areas. I think one of our biggest examples of that is going around with the mammo vans to different areas, which is really exciting. As we know, many women, I keep talking about mammo, but many women do not have the privilege of getting an annual exam when it's recommended.
Yeah, it really, like here in Ontario, if you go far enough up north, it's very stark, the care that you can get in Toronto versus the care that you'll get in, the far remote parts of Ontario or beyond. And it really hits home the fact of how maybe spoiled we are in certain areas and how the disparity even within our own country sometimes. So great work as far as trying to address those areas. If someone was watching this and they wanted to, this sounds very interesting, they'd love to be part of this. I'm curious what your elevator pitch would be to them, and what they should do next if they were interested.
On the spot for elevator pitch. Okay, I'll start with what they should do next. You should definitely go to radaid.org, check out the site. There is a volunteer portal. And I would say for all of our imaging folk, whether it's technologists, nurses, physician, administration, we've had volunteers of all kinds. I know that when I started looking to do global health work 20 some odd years ago, it was pre-RAD-AID, and then it took me a long time to realize RAD-AID existed. But I was always turned down because they were looking for people specifically who could do surgery, like for cleft palates. And I feel like I've definitely found my home. So if you believe that healthcare is for everyone, you should definitely check out our portal and sign up to volunteer.
And I think there's something to it where I've spoken to people that are interested, and there's everyone suffers from imposter syndrome. Everyone feels this, what do I have to offer? I'm just a PACS admin, or I'm just a whatever. And I think that's the thing, is like everyone just contact Ameena, and I'm sure that Ameena can put you in touch and direct you to something very useful, and you'll be impressed. And there's just, for me personally, this has been the most rewarding aspect of my career, being involved in anything to do with RAD-AID. So I'm happy to have been associated with a couple projects myself.
Absolutely, and we love having you. I'll also say that I was secretly having many panic attacks about, volunteering, and it's been one of the best decisions of my life, both personally and professionally.
Well, we usually leave these at around the 20-30 minute mark, so we're coming up at that. Is there anything else that you'd like to close out with, as far as just any final mentions about RAD-AID, or anything that you would like to mention as a closeout here?
So one thing I would definitely like to mention is my amazing team. The RAD-AID team has most definitely grown since I've been involved since 2019, and more specifically the informatics team, as we have some continuous volunteers, and then we also have some volunteers like yourself who come kind of, I don't want to say in and out, but we know that we can count on you. I don't want to name some names because I think on the spot I will forget some people, but I love the people that I work with, and the mission is amazing.
Yeah, it certainly is. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time today, Ameena. And we'll include in the description any relevant links if someone was interested in learning more about RAD-AID.
Perfect. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me.
The dream machine. DICOM, HL7, IAG in the snap. We're building the future, never looking back.